の名前はアストルフォ。
Representative Ilhan Omar recently made a tweet about war crimes and specifically called out the US, Israel, Hamas, and the Taliban. This false equivalence between liberal democracies and terrorist groups is disgusting. Omar's relationship with this nation makes it especially disgraceful. She was led into the US as a refugee after fleeing violence in Somalia. This country not only saved her, but let her rise to become a member of its national legislature. I thought the Democrats should have censured her for the tweet, but Pelosi and others at least criticized her for it. Expectedly, Vaush jumped at the opportunity to defend the anti-American Omar.
By drawing false equivalencies between democracies like the US and Israel and groups that engage in terrorism, like Hamas and the Taliban, foments prejudice and undermines progress towards a future of peace and security for us all. We welcome the clarification by Congresswoman Omar that there is no moral equivalency between the US and Israel and Hamas and the Taliban. And not only is this a, let's say, contestable statement, this is actually a straw man of Ilhan Omar's position.
This statement is so light on Omar, and yet Vaush has a problem with it. They're literally trying to give her the opportunity to walk her statement back.
She did not say the Taliban, Hamas, US, and Israel are all the same. What she said was there was an insufficient degree of accountability for war crimes committed by these groups. That's saying that all of these groups commit war crimes. This is a factual statement that you could factually prove by any metric of the term war crime. And that we don't do enough, that none of them do enough to address the, to address those war crimes.
Come on, Vaush. You wouldn't hold this position if it weren't someone ideologically similar to you. In fact, I know for sure that you were being dishonest because you expressed the opposite opinion in your debate with Saffron.
I want to be super freaking clear. I'm not defending China. I'm not defending the USSR.
Well, you are, though. By comparing them to America, you're downplaying the crimes that they've committed against us.
But I think you're...
If Omar were not trying to equate them, she could have just referred to war crimes generally, and not who they're committed by. It's like saying, I denounce bigotry from both the German government and the Jewish community in 1940. By criticizing those two entities together, you are implicitly equating them.
Ignoring the differences between democracies governed by rule of law and contemptible organizations that engage in terrorism at best discredits one's intended argument and at worst reflects deep-seated prejudice. This is the Ilhan Omar is anti-Semitic accusation again, by the way.
Vaush then goes on to actually defend the equating of the US and Israel with terrorist groups.
By the way, considering the fact that the Taliban exists in large part because of the United States, ISIS exists in large part because of the United States, and Hamas exists entirely because of the actions of the State of Israel, it is very, very funny that we're throwing our hands up about the potential of moral equivalency here.
What Vaush is referring to here is when the US funded the Mujahideen and when Israel funded the Gazan chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood. The US funded the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda came out of the Mujahideen after the Soviets were driven out, and ISIS later came out of Al-Qaeda. But laying the blame on the US for this reason is silly. The Soviets were a much bigger threat at the time to the US than the Mujahideen, so it made sense for the US to fund them. They couldn't foresee the long-term consequences. The US did the same thing by giving Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union to defeat the Nazis. You wouldn't then blame the US for the threat of communism after World War II. On the point about Israel and Hamas, Israel funded the Gazan Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was not engaged in violence at the time of funding. The reason for its funding was to provide an alternative to the PLO, which at the time was engaged in violence. This, however, proved to be a mistake as the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza evolved into Hamas and became a violent organization. The Muslim Brotherhood has existed longer than the State of Israel itself, so saying Israel is entirely responsible for Hamas is incorrect.
The United States, the harm that we have done, both domestically to our own population and abroad, is infinitely greater than the amount of harm done by the Taliban. And that is in large part because the United States is a world superpower and not a terrorist group. We have access to far more resources. So naturally, proportionally, we're going to do more harm. But the statement that there is some categorical similarity between the harm done by the United States and the harm done by, like, the Taliban even though that's not what Ilhan Omar was saying, that's a correct statement. You can't really say, well, America's not as bad as the Taliban. The Taliban's killed way more people per person than America has relative to its population of civilians.
But the good done by the US outweighs the bad. Having a constitution that's so good it's the oldest one in effect, the winning of 2 world wars for the Allies, the winning of the Cold War, the protection of foreign democracies through alliances such as NATO. The same thing can't be said for Hamas and the Taliban. Vaush's point is ridiculous. He'll twist himself into knots to compare democratic nations to terrorists. He even knows he's being dishonest, as in his MTG video denouncing her for being anti-Semitic. He has a Freudian slip and admits Ilhan Omar is too.
Anyway, long story short, Ilhan Omar is a bad person and unfit to lead or to represent our citizens. Did it? Wait, did I just say Ilhan Omar?
Thanks for giving the game away, Vaush. That was actually amazing. Oh look, he gave her AOC teeth in the thumbnail. The best thing about this situation is seeing the commies triggered by the Democrats calling them out. It's concerning to see a congresswoman say such blatantly anti-American things. However, it is reassuring to see the Democrats call it out. Subscribe for more videos like this. Comments would be much appreciated.